If you're a Harvard professor or you're a doctor or you're a teacher and you glorify or celebrate the murder, or depending which side you're on, whether you see it as murder or collateral damage as you go after Hamas, whatever you want to call it. But if you are seen celebrating
you had
the
to
death,
mention Hamas there, right?
I'm just showing you.
You had to throw shade.
No.
You just
you
have
know
to
my
mention
view of
Hamas,
this.
right?
No, Bassem. No, I'm simply saying.
You just have to mention Hamas.
I'm simply saying.
I remember.
There are many pro. Wait a minute.
In this video, Bassem Youssef shuts down Piers Morgan with some brutal truths on his own show. So Piers kicks things off by trying to frame the whole conversation around Hamas, basically slipping into that conservative narrative before anything else is even said. But Bassem just immediately calls it out. Like, you can tell he's not letting Piers slide into that lazy framing without pushback. And honestly, that's the biggest problem with Piers. He always tries to both sides genocide, as if civilian massacres can just be reduced to just one perspective. What makes this clash so good is that Bassem doesn't just stop at calling out the framing. He'll just completely dismantle Piers' framework of trying to disguise it under neutrality. So make sure to watch till the end to see how Bassem Youssef shuts down Piers Morgan with some brutal truths on his own show.
Let me clarify. The reason I clarified, there are many people who believe what the IDF has been doing with civilians is murder and genocide. There are others on the pro-Israeli side who believe that they are targeting a terror group in Hamas and that innocent people will get killed in the process. Therefore, it's not murder. So I'm clarifying the two sides of that debate. You have a strong view. Other people have an equally strong view the other way. But my point being, if you're in a position of
there's no two sides of genocide. There's no two sides of the Holocaust. There's no two sides. Seriously. So let's stop two-siding it because it's becoming exhausting.
Okay, let's not get into that part of the debate. The part I want to agree with you about is this. I think if you're an administrator of a university or a hospital or a school, if you're in charge of teaching people or medical practice, and you are seen celebrating the deaths of innocent people publicly on social media, you should not keep your job, right? Because clearly you are unfit for that job. And it should be down to the people who run these organizations to say, sorry, no, you don't get to teach kids if you glorify murder.
Well, there are people who are teaching kids on the left who glorified, hey, happy 5th anniversary for George Floyd. It's a 5 years sober because he's dead for 5 years. I mean, the thing is, my thing is, if we're going to live in a utopian, polite society, let's make it general. The idea of just cherry picking things
I don't disagree.
Yeah. So, and the thing is, here's the thing. This is the internet, Piers. The internet will always promote the most hateful, the most controversial reactions. This is how social media, there's a whole kind of scoring system. A like would be 1 point, an angry face would be 5 points. This is what the internet, this is what boils up to the surface. It's always like that. If people say, oh, Charlie was a good man, I hope he's in heaven, that will not get a lot of traction. But people with more controversial, that's just the function of the internet. But if you're gonna talk the internet, people all go on Twitter and they just write whatever on their mind. But if you're gonna punish people with whatever on their mind, so we need, I think, to expand this spectrum. And let me read something that Charlie Kirk himself tweeted, talking about free speech, because in April he said, tomorrow the House will vote on HR 867, a bill that will criminalize private boycotting of Israel, fines up to $1 million and prison up to 20 years. Bills like this only create more anti-Semitism and play into growing narratives that Israel is running the U.S. government.
So right here, Piers tries to play that neutral role again. He sets it up like, well, some people call it genocide, other people just see it as collateral damage. And honestly, that's not neutrality, that's just moral laundering. Because as Bassem points out immediately, there aren't two sides to genocide. You don't get to weigh mass civilian deaths like it's just a debate class exercise. And then when Piers pivots to this point about professionals being unfit if they glorify murder, Bassem doesn't just argue back, he flips it. He goes, look, people say vile things across the spectrum online, but punishing every dumb or offensive comment is dangerous. And he's right, because that's the nature of social media. It's designed to amplify outrage.
In America, you are allowed to hold differing views. You are allowed to disagree and protest. You're allowed to too many people who hate America to move here from abroad. But the right to speak freely is the birthright of all Americans. This bill should not pass. Any Republicans that vote for this bill will expose themselves. We will be watching very closely. And then it's very interesting that in the last 3 days after Charlie Kirk was killed, in the past 3 days, the Congress approved $650 million for Israel for missile defense. They presented an amendment that bans Pentagon from boycotting Israel. And they even proposed a bill to allow Marco Rubio to revoke citizenships for people critical of Israel. This is what we need to talk about. This is what we need to talk about. If there are like people there are people there who celebrate if the Pope would kill. There are people like, it's been going on for years. Even when the Pope if he died, people celebrate his death.
Yeah.
This is words. Yeah, it could be terrible, offensive words. But when you turn words into destroying people's careers, revoking people's citizenship because they talk about a foreign country, this is the real problem. This is the real problem with freedom of speech. That's not about people celebrating or angry about someone who died. All right, our roads and infrastructures, our education system, our healthcare, they're failing. While settlers in the West Bank, they occupy Palestine, they get free housing, get free healthcare, free education. Same in England. I mean, I'm sorry, but you as a very famous and a very able and a very competent investigative reporters, I think you should actually talk about why more than half of your cabinet in the British government is financed by Israel. Why the Royal Army, the Royal Air Force are giving logistical help to Israeli planes bombing Gaza. I'm sure that there's not a single British person who would agree on that. Isn't that more important than this kind of manufactured rage? I mean, why don't you talk about this is your tax money? Aren't you worried? No, but seriously.
No, I hear you.
I'm very, very curious. Yeah, but why don't you talk about this?
But Bassem, as you know, I talk about the war all the time. And as
you never talked about the Israeli lobby financing your British minister.
There are always
you
lots
never did.
All right, there are always lots
you
of...
You never did.
Okay, but there are lots of...
You never did.
Okay, but I've also been, as you know, increasingly critical of the Israeli government. You can't accuse me of being biased.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're not fooling me, Piers.
So this is where Bassem just really ramps it up. He takes Piers's whole point about celebrating death online and just flips it by saying, yeah, words can be offensive. But the real danger comes when those words start being weaponized into laws that strip people of rights. And he's dead right. He points out Congress throwing hundreds of millions towards Israel's missile defense, while also floating bills that could punish Americans for boycotting Israel or even threatening citizenship. That's way more dangerous than some troll posting edgy comments online. And honestly, this is where Piers just looks weak. Because instead of engaging with the substance, money, policy, real consequences, he just tries to say, well, I do cover the war, I do criticize Israel. But Bassem just isn't buying it. He just presses him even harder. Why don't you ever talk about your government's direct financing? Why don't you talk about the RAF giving logistical help to Israel's strikes? That's a brutal call-out, and Piers doesn't have a real answer. Now, to be fair, Piers's point that professionals who openly glorify murder shouldn't be in teaching or leadership positions does make sense on its own. Nobody wants a doctor or professor celebrating civilian deaths in public. But the issue Bassem nails is the selective outrage. Western media and politicians will obsess over individuals saying offensive things, while ignoring the structural stuff, like billions in aid and military backing, that actually keeps the occupation running.
I'm sorry, because I came on your show many times. I discussed October 7th. Many people came to you and asked you, and people said, "Oh, Piers Morgan have changed the mind." I'm sorry, it doesn't fool me for a second.
It's not about changing my mind.
I'm sorry. You and the Western media have been complicit in diverting and deflecting the truth and the facts. You are actually the real Iron Dome of Israel. You pretend to ask a tough question for the Israeli to maintain your credibility, but you, over the past 2 years, you had laundering Zionist talking points. You never investigated the Hannibal Directive. You never questioned why it took them 6 hours to respond. You never used the Hannibal Directive.
Well, how many times have I had you on the show?
No.
Well, how many times?
Don't throw.
How many times have you been on?
It doesn't matter. No. It's not about
You say I
me.
never
It's
question
about
these
you.
things. I've platformed you multiple times, and you have talked about this every time, right? So you have been doing that on my show. Literally, you have been doing that on my show.
And you effectively sabotage these interviews. I brought up in your interviews many times is a white Stanley, who's a British reporter who talked in length about the rape hoax, about the Hannibal Directive, and he was raided by British police. They took his laptop, and I asked you twice on your show to bring him on your show to talk to you about how the Israeli propaganda lies are all lies, but you never did. If you actually were actually honest about this, you would do this. Not about platforming. I mean, you platforming people. It's good for views. It's good for reach. But like, I'm sorry, it's about like how many times did Ben Shapiro come on your show and he talked about moral equivalency? There is no moral equivalency. There is no moral equivalency. While if
he thinks there is.
Yeah. He said there's no moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel. He said that.
That's
but
right.
the thing is, if any journalist who had read a little bit, who would say, well, Noam Chomsky said that moral equivalency is a propaganda term that was used in order to prevent us from looking to our action. So we turn people into bad guys and good guys. The bad guys, even if he's occupied, he deserves to be killed. The good guys, even if they nuke them, it's okay because it's the good guys. You see, this is how you do the conversation. It's not about platforming.
You think Ben Shapiro, listen, Bassem, you think Ben Shapiro is very partisan to the Israeli position? I wouldn't disagree. I don't think he would disagree. But many people think you are very partisan the other way, and that your hatred of all things Israel leads you to say things. Well, leads you. Hang on. Leads you to say things. Leads you to say things like this.
And wrapping this up, the split was obvious here. Bassem just kept dragging the conversation towards power, policy, and complicity, exposing how governments and media look the other way while funding and shielding Israel. That gave his arguments weight because he wasn't just reacting to words online. He was showing how bias shapes the whole system. And Piers, meanwhile, just stuck to tones and tweets, trying to look balanced but really sidestepping the harder truths. His point about professionals glorifying violence had some surface value, okay? But compared to Bassem's structural focus, it came off selective and just shallow. And that's the real takeaway here. Bassem highlighted bias, and Piers just embodied it in this debate. And speaking of bias,
are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing, and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story, so you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.